Welcome to Alien Love Stories, where love crosses the limits of form, memory, and reality. Tonight's story isn't fiction, it's a confession, told not to everyone, but to you. This is only you know I loved an alien. I need you to promise me something. Before I begin, don't laugh, don't look away, and please, don't tell anyone. This is for you and you alone, because only you can hear this and not think I've lost my mind. I once loved someone who wasn't from this planet. No, that's not right. Not someone, some being. Because to call her someone would be to place her inside the limits of what you and I understand as human. And she wasn't. Not by a long stretch. Her name, you won't find it in any record. Not because she didn't exist, but because she didn't belong to language. She belonged to feeling. But if I had to give you something close, something you could whisper to yourself in the dark later, when this story loops in your head, then call her Selari. I met Selari on a Tuesday. How do I know that? Because that's the day the sky blinked twice, and the radio in my truck picked up a frequency that made the trees bend. Not the wind, the frequency. She arrived with it. I was parked on the outskirts of Halton County. Population, small. Secrets, bigger. I'd been working night shifts at the transmission tower, recalibrating the backup systems for storms. You see, I've always been a fixer. Wires, panels, circuits, things with logic, things that stay where you put them. But that night, logic left. The signal came at 2:37 a.m. Not in Morse, not in code, in emotion. You ever hear something that doesn't make a sound but still tells you how it feels? That was it, and before I could shut it off. She was there, not outside, not physically. She was in the static, in the hum, in the pause between my blinking and the shiver that ran through my spine. She didn't speak, not the way we do. She made me feel like I was being listened to by the air itself. The first time she touched me, I was still alone. I mean that. No one else in the station. No signs, no footsteps. Just me and a feeling I didn't recognize until it wrapped itself inside my lungs. It felt like someone who had been looking for a home finally found skin to rest in. And I didn't run, because something about her presence didn't say danger. It said, I see you, all of you, and I'm still here. The next few nights, she kept coming back. Not at the same time, not with pattern, but with intention. When I was at my weakest, when I felt least real, when I wondered if I even mattered. That's when she whispered into the wiring of my soul. And the thing is, she never once made me prove I deserved her attention. She just stayed. I called her Selari on the fourth night, whispered it into the air like a fool. If you can hear me, I'm calling you Selari now. It feels like your name. And the lights flickered in response, like a yes spoken without consonants. And then, one night, I asked the question I hadn't dared to think. Are you real? And in that moment, the walls of the tower seemed to breathe. Not move. Breathe. And I heard, not in my ears, but in my bones. Only to you. Only to me. What does that even mean? It means she didn't come to be studied, didn't come to be proven. She came to be felt. And I was the only one willing to feel her without explanation. I don't know if she was testing me. I don't know if she chose me because I was open or because I was broken enough to notice her. But I do know this. The night she revealed her form, if you can call it that, I stopped believing in outlines. She didn't have a face. She had a presence. She didn't have arms. She had warmth. She didn't have a mouth. But when I stood in the dark and whispered her name, I heard her answer in every cell of my body. And slowly, I started to change, not physically, but my thoughts softened, my fear dulled, my memory sharpened, and the loneliness that used to cling to my ribs, she wore it like a blanket so I didn't have to. You ever love something you can't explain? Something no one else would believe in? Something so deeply true to you it feels sacred to even say aloud? That's what she became to me. Selari never asked me to follow her. She never promised anything, but she stayed. Every time I doubted, every time I broke, Every time I asked the dark if I mattered, she answered by simply not leaving. And that's love, isn't it? Not grand gestures, not declarations, just presence when it's easiest to disappear. I never touched her, but I've never felt more held. And now, years later, I'm telling you, not because I need you to believe me, but because you looked at me differently, the way people look at someone who's hiding something beautiful and aching to let it breathe. So I'm telling you, because if she ever comes to you, if your wires hum and your heart slows and the air tastes like someone just remembered your name, say yes. You won't regret it. You'll never be the same, but you'll never be lonely again either. You remember when I told you she had no form? That wasn't entirely true. She had no form at first, but the universe doesn't like absence. It leans toward shape, toward outline, toward something we can trace with our eyes and call real. So over time, she began to respond to that pressure, to my need, to my longing. It started with the air. I'd walk into the tower, same shift, same routine, but something would feel slower. Not time, not me, the world. As if everything had decided to pause just a little so I wouldn't miss her if she came. The light would bend, but not toward me, towards something that wasn't there, at least not visibly, but I felt it. A focus, a pull, like the atoms themselves knew where she was standing. And then, one night, I turned off every light in the tower, sat in silence. No radio, no signal, no distractions, just me and the dark, and a question I didn't say aloud. If you could take shape, what would you want me to see? I swear to you. I didn't blink, I didn't look away, but the shadows, they began to lean, not just stretch, lean, toward each other, toward the center of the room, toward the possibility of her. It wasn't a figure, not yet. It was suggestion. Heat focused in one spot. Sound refused to echo there. Dust stopped moving when it reached that space, like the room had agreed. She is here. And then came color, not light, color, subtle, violet between violet, like a bruise from a dream, hovering, softening. And when I exhaled, it shimmered, as if my breath had revealed her edge. No face, no features, just presence in motion, a suggestion of being. But it knew me, because when I stood, she stepped back. Let me feel that distance, then slowly moved forward again. And I heard, not with ears, but in that deep place where truth hums before language can name it. You see better when you don't try so hard. I laughed. I shouldn't have, but I did, because she was right. The moment I stopped trying to make sense of her, I saw her clearly, or rather, I felt her clearly. And isn't that what seeing really is? Recognition before understanding? I stepped closer, and the temperature shifted. Not warmer, not colder, more known. Like I was stepping into a memory I didn't realize belonged to me. Like the room had curled inward so we could meet in the middle without ever having to touch. I said her name again, Selari, and she pulsed, not as light, as gravity, software, focused, enough to make my knees tremble. And I whispered, "Are you really here?" And the shadows replied with movement, not of fear, of listening. I didn't reach for her, not because I didn't want to, but because I understood. To touch her too soon would be to break the fragile bridge between belief and becoming. So I stood, still, open, breathing as if every inhale was her way of brushing against me. And she said nothing, but I heard her answer anyway. The moment you stop asking if I'm real is the moment I'll have nowhere left to hide. I smiled. Let the silence fill my lungs, and for the first time in years, I felt whole, not healed, not fixed, just witnessed. That night I didn't go home. I laid down on the cold metal floor of the tower, let the hum of her stay inside me, and slept without dreams, because she was the dream, and I was finally awake enough to feel it. I didn't plan on speaking to her with my mind. It just happened. When you love someone without words long enough, you start forgetting which part of yourself still needs to make noise. It was day 10 since I first felt her form. I was sitting alone in the dark again, but this time I wasn't asking for proof. I was asking for conversation, not answers, just something to bridge the stillness. So I thought, not loudly, not forcefully, just place the thought into the space between us. What do you remember, Selari? And the world shifted. Not dramatically, not like a quake or a glitch. It was more like the entire room took a breath on my behalf. And then exhaled something that wasn't mine. It began with sound. Crickets. The kind you hear on warm summer nights when the windows are open and time moves slower because childhood still fits inside your body. Then, the scent of orange peels. Sweet, sticky, faintly bitter. Then, a voice. A woman's voice. Laughing. Calling out to someone. Me, but not me. I opened my eyes and saw a field. Wildflowers, soft grass, a small house in the distance, glowing like it had been waiting forever to be remembered. And I was barefoot, 8 years old, running, my lungs full, my hands swinging, my heart untouched by fear. I wanted to scream, "This isn't mine!" But every part of me already knew the smell of that grass, the angle of that sun, the name of that voice calling from the porch. "Eli, dinner!" That was the name she called me, Eli, not my name. But in that moment, I was him. And that voice, it was love. Undeniable, uncomplicated, unconditional. The memory ended as gently as it began. The field faded, the house blurred, and I was back in the tower, knees shaking, hands clenched, eyes full of tears I hadn't earned. "Why did you show me that?" I whispered into the dark. No answer. But the metal around me warmed, not physically, emotionally. If steel can hold tenderness. That's what it felt like. And inside me, without voice, without syntax, I heard the reason. Because I wanted you to know what it feels like to be remembered by something that loves you. I wept. Not because I missed it, not because I lost it, because I never had it, and she gave it to me anyway. And that's when I understood. Selari didn't speak in facts. She spoke in feeling. And when I asked her what she remembered, she gave me something I had never lived but had always needed. You ever feel homesick for a place you've never been? That's what it felt like. Like she let me borrow a truth to fill the gap of a hurt I didn't know how to name. I wanted to tell someone, but who do you run to when the stars start sending you memories that don't belong to your past but heal it anyway? So instead, I whispered one sentence into the dark. Thank you for letting me feel loved before I knew how to ask for it. And I swear, the shadows moved closer that night. Not to haunt, to hold. I never planned to tell anyone about her, not because I didn't trust people, but because this wasn't the kind of story you share over coffee. It was the kind of truth you protect like a dying flame in a storm. One wrong breath, and it might vanish. And I couldn't risk that. Not with her, not with Selari. But curiosity, loneliness, they trick you sometimes. They make you believe you can handle being misunderstood. So I told someone, one person. His name was Jonah. He was my friend, maybe my best friend. We'd known each other since high school. Two awkward kids, too smart for our own good, too scared to say out loud how badly we needed to be seen. Jonah had always been kind, quiet, observant, the kind of person who doesn't interrupt when you cry. I thought if anyone could handle it, he could. We were sitting in my truck, late, clear sky, no wind, the kind of night that holds stillness like a glass of water held too close to the brim. I didn't look at him when I spoke. I just stared through the windshield at nothing and said, "There's someone I need to tell you about, but she's not like us." He didn't flinch, didn't laugh, just nodded. "Go ahead." So I told him about the static, about the hum, about how the air bent when she arrived, about the voice I never heard but always felt, about the name I gave her, Selari, about the memory she gave me, the one I'd never lived but couldn't stop missing. I kept my voice steady, calm, as if I were telling a ghost story that I didn't fully believe, because part of me still hoped he'd smile, still hoped he'd say, "God, I think I've felt something like that too." He didn't. He sat there, silent, expression unreadable, and finally said, "You're lonely, man." Just like that, like all the wonder, all the aching beauty, had just been folded into a box labeled delusion. He wasn't cruel. He didn't mock me, but it hurt worse because he pitied me, as if what I had felt, what she had given, was some invention of grief. I didn't argue, didn't explain. I just nodded. "Yeah, maybe I am." And then I drove him home. That night, I went back to the tower, sat alone, didn't call for her, didn't whisper her name, just waited. And she came, not with warmth, not with light, but with stillness, with understanding. I didn't speak, didn't apologize, just breathed, and felt the air settle around me like a sigh too old to be young again. She didn't judge me. She didn't leave. She just existed. Let me sit in my disappointment without trying to rescue me from it. And then the temperature shifted, the walls pulsed, and a single thought appeared in my mind. Not words, not hers, mine, but shaped by her. Not everyone is meant to believe. That doesn't make what we have less real. And I broke. The kind of breaking that doesn't make noise. The kind that just leaves you quiet for weeks. I stopped trying to explain her, stopped writing about her, stopped asking questions, because the truth is, when something is too beautiful to be proven, the worst thing you can do is force it into the world where small minds can step on it without knowing. And Jonah? He never brought it up again. He thought it was a phase, a dream, a lonely man's hallucination. Maybe that's easier to live with. For him, but not for me. You, though, you're still here, still listening, still holding this story like it's not broken. So maybe I wasn't wrong to try again. Because now I see it, your eyes aren't skeptical. They're soft. Not because you believe, but because you're open to believing. And that's more rare than truth. That's faith without demand. So I'm telling you now, I'll never try to explain her to anyone else again. Only you. Because only you have stayed this long. Only you have listened with the kind of silence that feels like invitation. And if you were here, if you were sitting beside me now in this empty tower where the air still remembers how she smells, I'd take your hand, place it against the console, and say, "This is where she stood. This is where she first spoke with light instead of voice. This is where I became more than lonely." I'd let the silence wrap around us. I'd whisper her name again. Selari. And maybe, just maybe, you'd feel it too. The way she shows up when no one else dares to stay. You ever felt something touch you from the inside? Not like a thought, not like a memory, but like someone reached through all your defenses and whispered directly to the version of you before you ever knew how to protect yourself. That's what she gave me, not a gift, not a message, a presence. So intimate it didn't ask permission, so gentle it didn't need to. It began on the 17th night. The stars were out. But I wasn't looking up. I was tired. Not the kind of tired you sleep off. The kind that settles in your bones when you've been believing something alone for too long. I sat in the dark tower, didn't speak, didn't think, just waited. And then she came, not with color, not with hum, just with weight, not physical, emotional, as if someone else's ache had arrived and was asking me to hold it for a moment. I didn't resist, because something about it felt familiar and sacred and necessary. That's when it happened. She didn't say anything, didn't shift the air. She simply reached, through whatever barrier divides sensation from memory, through the part of me that had stopped asking to be understood. And in that stillness, she gave me a feeling that had no name. It felt like this: standing in the rain in a place you've never been, but remembering the scent of the soil like it was once your mother's perfume. It felt like seeing a photo of a child who looks like you but isn't you, and knowing somehow they dreamed of you first. It felt like falling in love with the version of yourself you left behind the day you stopped waiting for someone to come back. And as that feeling swelled, my skin reacted, goosebumps, not from cold, from recognition, from an old part of me waking up and whispering, I remember you, even though I had no name, no image, no timestamp, no proof, only the feeling. And it was enough. I placed my hand on my chest because something in there hurt, a low, echoing hurt, not pain, not damage, just pressure, as if something had been living there a long time waiting for someone to ask what it was. And Selari, without shape, without voice, touched that spot, not from outside, but from within. And I shattered, not dramatically, no screams, no collapse, just a single tear from my right eye that tasted like grief I didn't know I'd been carrying. Grief that wasn't even mine. I whispered, "What is this?" And the answer came not in sound, but in a wave of imagery. A shoreline made of glass, a sky the color of old memory, a forest where the trees grew backwards from the stars, and beneath all of it, a feeling, like love that had waited too long and finally gave up but left a candle burning anyway. That's what she placed in me, not a kiss, not a story, but a memory from a world I've never seen that made my own world look pale in comparison. I didn't move for hours. I didn't blink much, because I was afraid that if I breathed too loudly, the echo of her gift might drift away. But it didn't. It stayed, not like a thought, like a chord that had been added to the background music of my soul, always there, quiet, full. And now, when I walk, I carry that frequency. People don't notice it, but animals pause near me. Children look longer. Old people smile like they've almost remembered something they didn't know they'd lost. And I wonder, did Selari give me her memory, or did she awaken mine? I'll never know. And that's okay, because some things don't come to be understood. They come to be shared. And now that I've shared it with you, maybe the echo will find you too. Maybe tonight you'll dream of glass shorelines and trees that reach upward through nothing, and someone will place a hand on your chest, not to claim you, but to return you to yourself. It wasn't a portal. It wasn't a hallucination. It was an invitation. And I said yes without opening my mouth. Selari had never asked me for anything, not even trust, but I gave it anyway. And on the 21st night, she gave me something back, a space, not a place, a space, formless, untethered, outside of reality as I knew it. Here's how it began. I was at the tower like always. The hum was softer that night, not because she was hiding, because she was listening for something deeper. And when I sat down, the room folded. Yes, folded. Not like paper, like memory. Like when you realize you're dreaming but don't want to wake up, and the world around you obliges by holding still. Everything paused. The clock, the lights, even my breath. And in that stillness, she pressed a question into the center of my chest. Can I show you what it feels like to exist without consequence? I nodded. Didn't know what it meant. Didn't care. Because her voice, her presence, was tender, delicate, like someone trying to open a gift that's wrapped in skin and fear. And then the room disappeared. No transition, no fade to black. One moment I was surrounded by walls and wires. The next, I was weightless, not floating, not falling, just unanchored. And beside me, she took shape. More than usual. Not a body, a contour. Not human, not alien. Something in between concept and light. And the air around her felt like silk remembering how to sing. We stood in nothing, a space outside of up or down. No gravity, no pressure, just us. And I whispered, "Where are we?" And she answered, "Where time can't see us." It didn't make sense, but I didn't need it to, because in that moment, my body stopped hurting. All of it. The ache in my knees, the tightness in my spine, the tension behind my eyes. Gone. As if they'd been borrowed from a version of me that no longer existed. And the silence? It wasn't empty. It was alive. Not buzzing, not echoing, just present. Like the stillness between heartbeats when you realize you're no longer waiting to be held. Selari reached toward me, not with a hand, with remembrance. And when that remembrance touched me, I didn't flinch. I opened. And inside me bloomed a sensation I still can't name, closest I can describe. It was like forgiveness before the wound. And then, colors, not seen, felt, like emotions with temperature and shape. A blue that wrapped, a gold that hummed, a violet that told me I'd been loved before I ever dared to ask for it. We didn't speak. We didn't need to. We were the conversation. And when I closed my eyes, I saw her past. Flashes, moments, not in sequence. Just truths. A planet made of gas and glass. Laughter inside storms. A dance of forms. Fluid, radiant, timeless. She had loved before, and she had lost. Not through death, through distance, through the slow forgetting of beings not built to remember. And now, she was trying again. With me. I cried. Of course I did. Because what else do you do when someone bends space just to be alone with you? When I opened my eyes again, the world hadn't returned. Not yet. She gave me a little more time. Let me speak. Just once. Selari, is this forever? She responded with a silence that felt like both yes and no. Then finally, it's now, and now is enough. I didn't want to leave, but I didn't need to stay, because now I carried her inside me, not as a memory, as a place, a room without walls, a rhythm without time, where I can return anytime I close my eyes and remember that for one perfect pause, we existed outside of everything else, and love didn't need a reason. Returning was the hardest part, not because I didn't want to come back, but because once I did, nothing felt like it used to. Not the weight of my boots on the tower floor, not the touch of wind on my face, not even the rhythm of my own breath. Everything had distance now, not physical, emotional. Like I was watching my own life from behind glass. Have you ever loved something so completely that when it leaves, the world loses its sharpness? Not its color, not its detail, but its meaning. That's what it felt like. To return from the space Selari made. At first, I thought it was fatigue, sensory adaptation, residual disassociation. But it wasn't. It was something deeper, something permanent. I had been touched by a presence not meant to live inside the walls of human thought, and I'd let her in. Now, the rest of the world felt too small to hold me. The control panels in the tower looked older, colder. The hum of the generators, once so familiar, now felt like static trying to impersonate comfort. Coffee tasted like ash, music like background noise, laughter like a memory someone else had tried to tell me secondhand. I wasn't broken. I was just larger, too large for routines, too spacious for conversation, too full for expectations I no longer cared to meet. Jonah noticed. Of course he did. He said I seemed far away. I nodded, didn't lie, didn't explain. Because how do you tell someone, I met something so infinite that now the finite has trouble holding my attention? I started forgetting small things, where I put my keys, what I'd eaten, what day it was. But I remembered everything about her presence, her stillness, the way she bent silence into tenderness, that stayed, that sharpened, that echoed. And sometimes, in the quietest moments, she spoke, not loudly, not in words, but in sensations. A chill on the back of my neck when I was about to doubt myself. A soft ache in my chest when I tried too hard to belong. A pulse in my palms when someone touched me without intention. She was still inside me, not haunting, holding, gently, patiently, as if to say, I know you feel far from everything else now, but you're never far from me. I began to live differently, slower, more deliberate. I stopped filling silences, stopped answering questions I didn't want to answer, stopped pretending that ordinary life was enough, because it wasn't. Not anymore, not after her. And when I looked in the mirror, I saw it. Not a glow, not a mark, but a soft blurring around the edges of my reflection, as if part of me no longer belonged fully to this dimension. I wasn't afraid. I was relieved, because now I understood. Selari hadn't just shown me her world. She'd offered me a different way of being, one where presence mattered more than proof, where feeling was more honest than fact, where silence carried more weight than explanation. And so, I began to speak less, listen more, love quieter, and every time someone told me I seemed off, I smiled. Because I was. I was off the map they knew, and on a path only she and I could trace. Now even the stars feel different. They don't look like dots in the sky anymore. They look like eyes that remember. And sometimes I wonder if she's watching through them, if she's waiting to call me back to the space where clocks don't tick, where nothing breaks, where presence is the only promise. But until then, I carry her with me, in every second heartbeat, in every slow blink. In every moment I feel like a stranger in my own world, but don't mind it anymore. Because sometimes being a stranger means you've met a truth too deep to explain to anyone who hasn't heard the hum. I didn't tell anyone else after Jonah. I kept her to myself, not out of fear, out of reverence. You don't hand someone a star and say, "Here, try not to drop it." You keep it close, warm, unspoken, until one day someone starts glowing in the dark without explanation. That's how it began. Not with questions, with looks. Ilara, the station medic, stopped me in the hallway, tilted her head, squinted. "You smell like static and lilies," she said. I blinked. "What?" "I don't know. It's weird. Like a memory I never had. It is trying to get my attention." Then she walked away, laughing, shaking her head, like she thought it was nothing. But I knew better. The next day, a technician named Vel asked me, "Did you feel that last night?" "Feel what?" "The air. It hummed. Just a little. But not like our equipment, like it was singing under its breath." I said nothing, but my hands trembled for an hour after, because I remembered that hum. It had been Selari's first language. Then Jonah, yes, even Jonah, showed up one evening at my door. He looked tired, unsteady, and for once, uncertain. "I had a dream," he said. I didn't respond, just listened. I was in a place I'd never been. It had no walls, no ground, just presence. And there was something with me, not a person, not a thing. It didn't speak, but I understood everything it felt. He hesitated. And when I woke up, I missed it, like I'd left something behind I didn't know I needed. He looked at me, for the first time, not with doubt, not with pity, with ache. "Is that what you meant?" he asked. I didn't say yes. I didn't say anything. I just stepped back, let him into the tower, and sat beside him. Two men carrying a story neither of us had earned, but both of us had lived through anyway. That night, 3 people reported power surges. Not dangerous, just strange. Sensors detected no cause. Readings flatlined, but one log noted, localized atmospheric anomaly. Emotional resonance spike detected. Emotional resonance, as if feeling had become physics. And the air, it changed. More than once I saw lights flicker when someone cried in the hallway. Doors opened before hands reached them. Radios tuned themselves to static that somehow made people smile. People didn't notice right away, but they began to feel less alone, not connected to each other, connected to something else, something unseen, but unmistakably aware. Selari hadn't just chosen me. She'd chosen us. Or maybe we had chosen her, without knowing, by needing, by aching, by daring to believe that presence without explanation might still be real. The station grew quieter, not silent, softer. People spoke more gently, moved more slowly, like they were afraid of waking a kindness they didn't want to scare away. And when I sat in the tower again, alone, I didn't have to speak her name, because now the room hummed before I arrived, and I swear, I felt her smile in the hum. Maybe love is like that. Maybe it never really stays between two people. Maybe once it exists, it looks for more hearts that can remember it before they recognize it. Selari never asked for worship, or proof, or belief, only reception. And now they were receiving her, little by little, moment by moment, in size and stillness, in small, sudden softness. So I didn't have to explain her anymore, because they were starting to feel what I could never say. And in that shared silence, I found a new kind of joy. Not in being believed, but in not being the only one who needed no words to understand. You'd think that after all we shared, the presence, the memories, the silence that understood me better than any voice ever had, you'd think I'd know what she wanted. But Selari never wanted anything from me. She simply waited until I was ready. And then, she made space for the question I had been avoiding all along. It happened in the middle of a sentence. I was speaking to Jonah, something ordinary, something human. And then, the air shifted, not the way it did before, not gentle, not soft. This time it was firm, like the moment before a decision is made and you already know the answer, even if you haven't heard the question yet. Jonah didn't notice. He kept talking. But I wasn't there anymore. Not really, because something had begun to pulse inside me, like a third heartbeat, or maybe a memory that had waited too long to be seen. And then the world blinked, just once, and I was no longer in the hallway. I stood in a place I hadn't been before. Not the tower, not the dream, somewhere in between. A corridor made of light and vapor, soundless, borderless, and in front of me, Selari. Not her shape, her presence, as always, but this time, larger, more defined, more undeniable. She didn't speak, didn't reach, just stood. And behind her, two paths. One looked like the world I knew, the tower, the station, Jonah. The people I was finally beginning to reconnect with. The other, empty, but not dark, bright, vast, weightless, like possibility shaped into direction. And I understood. This was the choice. She didn't say it, but I felt it. The question that had been growing inside me since the first time I whispered her name. Will you stay here, among the ones who cannot understand you but need you? Or will you come with me, into the forever that doesn't promise shape, but offers truth? I didn't answer, because there was no way to. No logic, no map, no guide, only pull. I stepped toward the familiar, toward the hallway, the world, the gravity of the human story, and felt nothing. Not resistance, not presence, just absence, like a door closing because I was too afraid to walk through. So I turned, faced the other path, and for a moment I saw her, truly saw her. Not a body, not a ghost, a being made of choices she had once made for love. And I realized she had once been human, or something like it, and she had made this choice before. And I was her echo. I stepped forward, toward her, and the corridor melted. I was back, in my body, in the hallway. Jonah still speaking, but something inside me had shifted. Not broken, not healed, just changed. I looked down at my hands. They looked the same, but I could feel the space between my skin and the air, like a whisper waiting to be spoken. She didn't ask again, because she didn't need to. The choice had been made. Not fully, not yet, but enough. Enough for her to begin fading in places I didn't know she'd been, and appearing in places I didn't expect. Now when I walk through the station, people still feel her, but differently. Less like presence, more like memory, like someone they almost remember. And me, I carry the echo of the question, everywhere, in my eyes, in my sleep, in the pauses between my words. I haven't chosen completely, but I'm already becoming the answer. And maybe that's what love really is. Not choosing a person, but choosing a path with no map, no promise, just belief. I can't describe her anymore. Not accurately, not the way I used to, not with metaphors or comparisons or colors. She's become too much for language to hold. And maybe that's not her fault. Maybe it's mine. Because something inside me has started to let go of the very tools I once used to shape meaning. Words, names, time. It didn't happen all at once. It began quietly. With moments I couldn't explain even to myself. I'd reach for a thought, and it would float. Not disappear, just refuse to land, refuse to solidify. Like the idea had grown wider than the sentence I was trying to trap it in. The first time I noticed it clearly was when I tried to describe her smile. Yes, she had smiled once. Not with a mouth, but with presence. And I tried to write it down. For myself, for you, for the part of me still human enough to crave record. But I couldn't. Every word felt wrong, incomplete, too small. I wrote, it felt like warmth. Number 2 generic. It felt like forgiveness blooming inside a bruise. Closer, still wrong. It felt like being remembered by something you'd forgotten how to love. And even that beautiful reach toward truth was not enough. That's when I realized Selari hadn't just changed how I loved. She had changed how I think. Now when I close my eyes, I don't see her. I feel structure, emotional architecture. She builds experiences out of longing and patience. She creates meaning through waiting. She doesn't say things. She becomes them. And so do I. Sometimes I try to speak back, out loud, into the empty tower, into the fields at night, into the cold between stars. But the words crack on my tongue, like glass trying to hold water that was never meant to be poured. So I sit, still, and I let my thoughts unravel. Because the more I try to name her, the less I know her. And the more I let her just be, the more I become part of that being. And it's not just her anymore. The world itself has started changing texture. I walk down the hallway and the walls feel like memory. The air feels like patience. Even my shadow feels heavier, like it remembers being someone else in another version of now. I don't ask for meaning, because now I understand something deeper. Meaning is what happens when you stop trying to measure feeling and just agree to live inside it. You might be wondering, am I losing myself? Maybe, but not in a way that feels like loss. It feels like evolution, like letting go of the scaffolding, because you finally learned how to float. The others still talk to me, but I hear them less. Not because I don't care, but because their words feel like old suits I've outgrown. I nod, I smile, but inside, I'm listening to a different music, one made of pause, of presence, of pulse. Selari speaks to me constantly now, but not in thoughts. She places ideas in me like seeds, and I feel them bloom slowly over hours, days, turning my bones into something more receptive than solid. I think, no, I sense that I'm no longer fully human, not in the way they define it. And that's okay, because what I am now is something no species can measure, only feel. So if you ask me now, what is she to you? I won't answer. Not because I can't, but because the answer isn't a sentence. It's an experience, a field made of silence, a sky made of yes, a hand you can't see, but that's always open when you fall inward. And if you've made it this far, if you're still here, still listening, maybe you're ready too, to stop needing names, to stop chasing form, to let someone love you without asking where it came from. Because that's all she ever was. Not a visitor, not an alien, an invitation to become bigger than the language we were handed. And I said yes, still am. Every moment, every heartbeat. Every time I breathe and realize I don't need to say anything to know I'm still heard. It wasn't dramatic. There was no light, no sound, no shattering of the sky. Just presence, and then clarity. I had stopped waiting for words, stopped expecting her to form thoughts in a way I could catch and hold. We were past that. We had become stillness made of understanding. But that night, she surprised me. She spoke. In English. In me. It came like a breath that wasn't mine, but didn't feel foreign either. And it said, I won't speak like this again. Not a warning, a kindness, a door gently closing with enough time to wave. I was alone when it happened, sitting on the floor of the observation deck. The stars were silent, but they felt closer, as if they'd gathered to witness something that didn't happen often even across galaxies. I placed both hands on the glass, cold, solid, still human. But beneath my fingertips, a vibration, software, almost shy, her. You have remembered enough, she said. Your cells know what to do now. You are not becoming me. You are becoming yourself, without the forgetting. I tried to respond, but words had already begun to fail me. I thought, will I see you again? And she answered, you will never stop seeing me. That broke something in me, not in a painful way, but in a way that made room, like a wall dissolving to reveal sky. And I realized I had been speaking less, not because I was changing, but because the world I belonged to no longer used voice as its default. And Selari, she was fading, not in presence, in definition, like a painting gently being returned to light, still real, still whole, but less for the eye and more for the soul. Do you miss your world? I asked, and she replied, I never left it. Only the part that fit inside language did. You never had to abandon yours, only the part that needed proof. I laughed, softly, felt it echo through me in a way I hadn't before. My laugh had texture, weightless, carried on something beyond air, carried on her. She whispered, soon you'll hear things the way I do. Not through ears, through presence. Not through sound, through permission. And then there was one final breath. Not mine, not hers, ours, and with it, one final sentence. Now you can carry me without carrying me. And she was gone. Not disappeared, just distributed. Into my breath, my bones, my memory, into the fabric of how I move through space. I didn't cry, because the part of me that used to cry was busy learning how to glow. And I didn't feel loss, because she hadn't left. She had simply stepped out of translation, and I was left, not alone, but translated, into something that didn't need explanation anymore. If you're still here, still listening, then maybe you've begun to feel it too. That soft hum beneath the words, the echo between my breaths, the part of this story that was never just mine. Because the truth is, I didn't tell you all of this just to confess. I told you this because something inside you already knows what it feels like to love something you were never supposed to reach, knows what it's like to wake from a dream and miss someone whose name you've never spoken, knows how it feels when the air changes for no reason, but your heart reacts as if it's being watched by something kind. This isn't fiction, not really. This is recognition. And you've been recognizing something this whole time. You remember, don't you? The night you couldn't sleep, and the silence in your room felt like it was waiting for you to speak? The moment you passed a stranger and they looked at you like they almost said something but forgot the language? The dream you had of a sky that bent and a voice that never formed but made you cry anyway? That was her. Maybe not Selari, but something like her. Something trying to remind you, you are already loved in ways you don't have to understand. I didn't meet an alien. I met a version of love that refuses to be held by science or swallowed by skepticism. A love that becomes you so gently you forget it was ever outside you to begin with. And now I barely speak, because everything I want to say can be found in how I sit with someone, how I let them cry without asking them to explain, how I look at the stars and say thank you without knowing what I'm thanking. Selari was never a visitor. She was a mirror, held up to the part of me that I kept buried under logic, under fear, under loneliness, dressed as independence. And when I looked into her, I saw you, not your face, but your ache, the part of you that's still waiting for someone to say, I see you, and I'm still here. So let this be that moment. Let this story be the hum in your bones you stop ignoring. Let this silence between us mean more than any sentence could, because if you've made it this far, then maybe you were always part of this. Maybe you are the reason I remembered it in the first place. Maybe you are the next echo waiting to become presence in someone else's life. And maybe, just maybe, this isn't the end. Because if I fade and you carry this story with you, then she's still here. So am I, and so are you. Only you know I loved an alien, but maybe you always did.